The planet Zenthara, home to the peaceful alien race known as the Xerinthians, was once a symbol of prosperity in the galaxy. The vast cities, gleaming with advanced technology, stood tall under the serene skies. But that peace was shattered when the Krull Dominion, a brutal and technologically superior alien empire, set its sights on Zenthara. The Xerinthians had always prided themselves on their scientific knowledge and peaceful ways, but they were no match for the Krull's war-hungry nature. It started with small raids, scouts, reconnaissance ships, and subtle probes to test Zenthara's defenses. The Xerinthians had hoped it was just a misunderstanding, perhaps a show of force. But as the weeks passed, the Krull's intentions became clear. They wanted Zenthara to fall, and nothing would stop them. The first wave of attacks came from the skies. Krull ships, massive and ruthless, launched devastating orbital bombardments that decimated entire cities. The Xerinthian military, though advanced in technology, was simply overwhelmed. Their defenses, designed for peacekeeping and exploration, were no match for the brutal efficiency of the Krull war machines. Entire fleets were lost in the initial onslaught, and as the Krull ships hovered above the planet, raining destruction, it became clear that survival would be impossible without help. In the ruins of the once thriving capital city, the Xerinthian leaders huddled together, trying to form a last-ditch plan to save what was left of their civilization. Their buildings were collapsing, and the once vibrant streets were now desolate, filled with smoke and ash. The Krull had begun their ground assault. Xerinthian soldiers, despite their bravery, couldn't hold back the tide of the invaders. The capital was doomed. Their people were dying. There was only one option left, a plea for help. In the depths of Zenthara's last remaining communication center, an ancient device, capable of sending signals across the vast stretches of space, was activated. It was a signal of desperation. We need help. Our world is falling. The Krull are too powerful. If anyone can hear this, please, help us. The message echoed through the void, hoping against hope that someone, anyone, would be listening. But the hours passed, and then days, with no response. The Xerinthians, once confident in their technology and wisdom, now felt utterly helpless. The Krull forces were relentless, and their final assault was approaching. The countdown to their extinction was almost over. As the Xerinthian leaders prepared for the worst, they heard something. A faint signal, a static-filled, barely audible message that flickered through their ancient communications device. This is humanity. We hear your call. Help is on the way. The Xerinthians stared at the screen, disbelief spreading across their faces. Who were these humans? The Krull had been known throughout the galaxy for their cruelty and power, and the Xerinthians had never encountered a species like them before. Humanity had always been considered a primitive race, a species on the edge of the galaxy, barely surviving in a small corner of the universe. What could they possibly do to help? But at that moment, the Xerinthians had no choice but to hold on to this faint hope. It was all they had left. They had no other allies in the galaxy. As the Krull forces began to descend upon the capital, they could only watch as the enemy prepared their final assault. The clock was ticking, and their world was slipping through their fingers. But then, just as the last hope began to fade, the unthinkable happened. Far above Zenthara, in the inky blackness of space, the stars began to shimmer in a way that no one had ever seen before. It wasn't a natural phenomenon. It was something else. A massive fleet appeared, its ships cutting through the darkness like shadows. The Xerinthians had never seen anything like it. The ships were unlike any vessels they had ever encountered. Their sleek, angular designs were built for speed and power, with energy shields flickering across their surfaces. Cloaking devices made the ships seem to vanish and reappear at will. The Xerinthian leaders, who had thought they had already lost everything, could only watch in awe as the fleet moved in. It wasn't a massive armada, but it was powerful, and it was coming straight for them. The fleet wasn't Krull. It wasn't any other alien species. It was human. The Zerinthians had never expected a species so far out in the galaxy to come to their aid. The humans had responded to a signal sent in desperation. Now, it was time for them to find out just how far the human spirit could go. But the Zerinthians still didn't know what to expect. Could these humans truly help them? Could they really defeat the Crawl? Just as the Crawl forces began their descent to wipe out the last city, humanity's ships emerged from the void. The sight was beyond anything the Zerinthians had ever imagined. The human ships didn't wait for an invitation. They didn't come with words. They came with action. The Crawl fleet had been prepared to crush Zenthera's last defense. But the humans were not like any other force the Crawl had encountered. They didn't attack with overwhelming numbers. They attacked with precision, with speed, and with a fierce, almost primal determination that was alien to the Crawl. As the Crawl ships opened fire on the incoming human fleet, the human ships flickered in and out of visibility, using their advanced cloaking technology to evade shots that would have shattered any other fleet. The Crawl were left in confusion, their lasers missing their marks as the human ships outmaneuvered them with uncanny skill. On the ground, the human soldiers deployed. They were not like the Zerinthian defenders, who fought with traditional tactics and weaponry. The humans were warriors. They fought with advanced exoskeletons, their movements fast and precise, aided by AI systems embedded in their gear. Zerinthian soldiers, still reeling from the Crawl's assault, watched in awe as the humans surged forward, their weapons crackling with energy. The battle for Zenthera's survival had begun. The Zerinthians could hardly believe their eyes. They had thought their world was lost, but here were the humans, fighting with a fury and resolve they had never seen before. Humanity had arrived, not just as a savior, but as a force that could change the course of the war. With every shot fired and every Crawl ship destroyed, the Zerinthians felt a new sense of hope rising within them. They had called for help, and now the humans were here, fighting alongside them. They had heard the desperate plea, and they had come. The countdown to destruction had stopped. For the first time in days, the Zerinthians dared to believe in victory. And yet, as the battle raged on, they all knew one thing: this was only the beginning. The Crawl would not give up easily, but with humanity at their side, they now had a chance to fight back. The Zerinthians had called for help, and humanity had answered. Now, the real fight began. The once peaceful Zenthara, a planet of lush green valleys and towering cities, stood at the edge of total destruction. The Crawl Dominion, a ruthless empire of war-hungry aliens, had come with their fleet, unstoppable in both technology and cruelty. Zenthara's peaceful inhabitants, the Zerinthians, had fought bravely, but their weapons and defenses were no match for the might of the Crawl. As the last city crumbled under the weight of the Crawl's assault, the Zerinthians' only hope was a desperate call for help into the vast emptiness of space. Days passed with no response. The Crawl fleet continued its relentless bombardment, and the Zerinthians feared the worst. But in the midst of the chaos, just as their world seemed on the brink of collapse, something remarkable happened. From the deep blackness of space, a series of signals pierced through the static. At first, it was a faint hum, almost imperceptible. Then, a voice, clear and full of resolve, echoed across the Zerinthian communication system. "This is humanity. We hear your call. Help is on the way." The Zerinthians, bewildered and uncertain, had no idea who these humans were. Their species was barely known in the vast galaxy, considered by many to be primitive and unworthy of much attention. But in the desperate situation they faced, the Zerinthians held on to that faint hope. For the first time in days, a spark of belief flickered within them. They had not been forgotten. Something was coming to their aid. And then the sky above Zenthera began to tremble. The earth shook, and the ground cracked as massive, otherworldly shapes emerged from the heavens. The Crawl fleet, already preparing for the final assault, had no idea what was coming. They had expected their victory to be swift and absolute. But as they scanned the skies, their sensors picked up something they couldn't comprehend. The Zerinthians watched, their eyes wide with disbelief, as hundreds of human ships, sleek, metallic, and glowing with power, appeared in hyperspace. The ships weren't like anything they had ever seen. The first ship to break through the atmosphere was like a shadow in the sky, its dark, angular form sleek and menacing. It shimmered in and out of visibility, as though it could slip in and out of existence at will. The ship's cloaking technology made it difficult to track, but the energy shields that surrounded it flickered, radiating power and precision. It wasn't just one ship. As the Zerinthians looked up in awe, more and more ships emerged from the blackness. Dozens, then hundreds, each one more impressive than the last. The Zerinthians had seen warships before, but nothing like this. These humans, far from being weak, were something entirely different. Their ships were designed for speed, precision, and domination. They cut through the void like predators stalking their prey. And unlike the Kraul, whose ships were massive and brutish, the human vessels seemed to hum with purpose, elegant yet deadly. The Kraul, still underestimating their adversaries, began to open fire. But their weapons, designed to obliterate entire cities in an instant, met the unthinkable. The human ships danced in the air, weaving in and out of the Kraul's shots, vanishing and reappearing, their cloaking devices confusing the enemy. As the Kraul realized too late that they couldn't hit their targets, the humans countered with ruthless efficiency. Precision strikes tore through the Kraul fleet, turning their advanced warships into burning wreckage in mere moments. On the surface, the Zerinthians stood frozen, watching in awe as humanity's fleet systematically tore apart the Kraul's forces. The humans were not just fighting to win. They were fighting with a purpose, with a ferocity the Kraul had never expected. The Zerinthians, who had thought their fate was sealed, now saw a glimmer of hope. The Kraul fleet had thought they were unstoppable, but the humans' advanced technology and tactics were proving otherwise. As the last remnants of the Kraul ships disintegrated under the humans' assault, the Zerinthians' leaders could hardly believe their eyes. For the first time in days, they felt a wave of relief. It wasn't over. They weren't going to die today. The human ships, having disabled the Kraul's fleet, descended toward the planet's surface, their energy shields crackling as they pierced through Zenthora's atmosphere. The Zerinthians couldn't help but marvel at the technology of their new allies. The ships were equipped with AI systems that enhanced their maneuverability, each ship a perfect harmony of man and machine. The ships were not only fast but smart, predicting the Kraul's movements and outsmarting them at every turn. But it wasn't just the ships that amazed the Zerinthians. It was the humans themselves. As the Zerinthians watched from the safety of their hidden bunkers, they saw human soldiers descend onto the battlefield. These humans didn't hesitate, even for a moment. They weren't the weak, scared beings the Zerinthians had imagined. They were warriors, fighting for a cause that wasn't their own, but one they had chosen to take up. The Zerinthian soldiers, who had been cornered and outnumbered, now felt a rush of hope as the humans fought alongside them. The human soldiers wore advanced exoskeletons that enhanced their strength and speed. They moved like lightning, each step calculated, every shot precise. Their weapons crackled with energy, cutting through the Kraul like they were nothing more than paper. The Kraul, who had once believed they would crush the Zerinthians effortlessly, now found themselves struggling to keep up. For the first time, the Zerinthians saw that they were not alone in this fight. Humanity had arrived, and with their arrival came not just a ray of hope, but a storm of fury that would shake the galaxy to its core. The Zerinthian commanders, still in shock, knew this wasn't the end of the battle. There were still Kraul forces scattered across the planet, and the human fleet could only do so much. But seeing the humans fight with such relentless determination, the Zerinthians knew they had a fighting chance. Humanity had shown them that they could win against the odds. The Kraul had underestimated them, and now they would pay the price. As the last Kraul ship fell from the sky, the Zerinthians looked toward the human fleet, still hovering in the air above them. These humans, these strangers from a distant world, had not only saved their planet, they had shown them what true strength looked like. In the weeks to come, as the Krull Dominion regrouped and began their retreat, the Zarinthians would learn just how far humanity would go to protect those they cared about. And as the war continued, the Zarinthians would stand side by side with their new allies, ready to fight, to learn, and to rebuild. But for now, they could only stand in awe of the unexpected heroes who had saved their world, and in their hearts, a new belief had taken root. Humanity was not just a species to be pitied, it was a species that had earned their respect. The Zarinthians were no longer alone. They had humanity on their side. As the dust settled after humanity's sudden arrival, the Zarinthians watched in awe and disbelief. The Krull fleet, which had seemed unstoppable just hours before, was now in disarray. The once proud alien empire, with its massive warships and overwhelming firepower, had been caught completely off guard by the sheer precision and ferocity of humanity's counterattack. The humans didn't waste any time. They had arrived with one goal: to protect the Zarinthians and eliminate the Krull threat. The ground forces quickly mobilized, descending onto the battlefield with a sense of urgency. The Zarinthians, still trying to comprehend what was happening, could barely believe their eyes. The human soldiers were unlike any they had seen before. They wore sleek, high-tech exoskeletons that enhanced their strength and agility, and each one was accompanied by a highly advanced AI companion built into their gear. These AIs weren't just assistants, they were strategic minds, constantly analyzing the battlefield and offering real-time advice to the soldiers. They were more than just weapons, they were a complete system designed for efficiency and precision. The Krull were stunned. They had never encountered a force like this before. Their fleets, designed for total domination, were now being ripped apart by the humans' unpredictable tactics. The humans didn't fight like other species. They weren't predictable. They didn't follow the conventional strategies the Krull had prepared for. Instead, they adapted and improvised with a speed that left the Krull leaders scrambling to respond. They were fast, efficient, and ruthless in their assault. The Zarinthians had watched their own forces be wiped out by the Krull in brutal and overwhelming attacks. They had fought valiantly, but their advanced technology was no match for the Krull's superior numbers and firepower. But now, as the humans took the fight to the Krull, they saw something they had never expected to see. These humans, despite being outnumbered, fought with a relentless determination. They fought like warriors with a mission, each one driven by the desire to protect the helpless and to push back against a greater enemy. It was an awe-inspiring sight, a small band of humans standing firm against the tidal wave of Krull forces. The first battle was chaotic and brutal. The Krull, still reeling from their initial defeat, launched a counterattack, sending their forces into the heart of the city. They came in waves, massive armies of soldiers and war machines, each one more vicious than the last. But the humans didn't flinch. They fought back with a vengeance, moving swiftly through the streets of Zenthora's capital, their exoskeletons giving them the strength and speed to overcome the Krull's brute force. The Zarinthians, watching from their shelters, could only stare in awe. The humans weren't just fighting, they were outsmarting the Krull at every turn. Where the Krull relied on overwhelming force, the humans used cunning and strategy. The Krull expected a straight-up fight, but the humans had other plans. They set traps, ambushed enemy forces, and used their advanced AI to predict the Krull's movements. The Krull couldn't keep up. Their massive war machines, designed to crush all in their path, were taken down one by the humans' superior tactics. In the sky above, the human fleet continued to battle the remnants of the Krull fleet. The humans were using cloaking technology to their advantage, striking from unexpected angles and quickly retreating before the Krull could retaliate. The Krull, desperate to regain control, launched every weapon at their disposal, but the humans were always one step ahead. The human fleet's AI systems were constantly calculating the best course of action, directing each ship with pinpoint accuracy. The crawl ships, once the most advanced in the galaxy, were now being systematically dismantled by the humans' superior tactics. On the ground, the battle raged on. Humanity's soldiers fought in tight formations, moving with precision and purpose. Each step was calculated, each strike designed to maximize efficiency. The humans had an uncanny ability to predict the crawl's moves, anticipating their next step before they even made it. The Zerinthians had never seen anything like it. The humans didn't just fight. They seemed to be living in the future, always thinking 2 or 3 steps ahead. It was like watching a game of chess played on a battlefield. The crawl, unable to adapt to the humans' tactics, were soon overwhelmed. Their massive war machines were no match for the precision strikes of the human soldiers. Each attack was like a surgical strike, taking down one crawl warship or soldier at a time. The Zerinthians could feel the tide of battle shifting in their favor. The crawl had underestimated humanity, and now they were paying the price. The first battle was far from over, but the Zerinthians could see the outcome. The humans were winning. The crawl were being pushed back, their forces scattered and broken. And for the first time in days, the Zerinthians felt a glimmer of hope. They had called out into the void for help, and the humans had answered. Not only had they answered, they had brought with them the firepower and determination to turn the tide of the war. But as the battle raged on, the Zerinthians couldn't help but feel a deep sense of gratitude. The humans had come from a distant world, not knowing them, not knowing anything about their planet or their people, and yet they had fought for them, fought to save them from annihilation. The Zerinthians had no way of repaying the debt they owed to humanity, but they would do everything in their power to ensure that this debt was never forgotten. The first battle, though bloody and hard-fought, was just the beginning. The crawl were regrouping, preparing for a final push to finish what they had started. But the humans weren't backing down. The Zerinthians, now united with their unexpected allies, knew that the war was far from over. But with humanity at their side, they were no longer the underdogs. Together, they would stand and fight, and together, they would triumph. As the sun set over the battle-scarred landscape, the Zerinthians stood tall, ready to face whatever the crawl threw at them next. With humanity's help, they had a chance, a real chance, to win this war. And in that moment, they knew they would never give up, never surrender, not while they had their new allies by their side. The fight had only just begun, but the Zerinthians were no longer afraid. With the humans by their side, they were ready for whatever came next. The battle raged on, a blur of chaos and destruction. The sound of distant explosions echoed through the streets of the Zerinthian capital, a constant reminder of the crawl's unrelenting assault. But amidst the violence and confusion, something unexpected was happening. Amidst the wreckage of war, a bond was being forged between 2 individuals, one Zerinthian and one human, whose worlds had once seemed galaxies apart. Calyx, a Zerinthian officer, had seen his people suffer for far too long. He had watched the crawl destroy their cities, their homes, their families. He had led countless missions, only to return with nothing but bodies and broken dreams. As he stood on the front lines, coordinating the defense of the city, Calyx knew that it would be a miracle if any of them survived this war. And yet, despite the overwhelming odds, there was a flicker of hope, a hope that had been ignited by the arrival of humanity. Sergeant Bonner, the human soldier Calyx had met when the first wave of ground troops arrived, was unlike any fighter Calyx had ever seen. Bonner had the look of a man who had seen too much, a veteran of many battles, but his eyes burned with a fire that Calyx couldn't quite comprehend. Bonner wasn't just fighting to survive. He was fighting for something more. Calyx had watched as Bonner led his team with unwavering determination, each movement calculated, each decision deliberate. At first, Calyx couldn't understand why Bonner fought with such intensity. To the Zerinthians, war had always been about survival, about defending their way of life, about holding on for as long as they could before being overwhelmed by the crawl. But Bonner, and the humans with him, seemed to fight for something greater. They fought for each other. They fought not just to survive, but to protect those around them. It was a concept Calyx had never truly grasped until he spent time with Bonner. In the midst of a particularly brutal firefight, Bonner pulled Calyx aside. They were in the trenches now, the front lines of the battle, and the Crawl were pushing hard. Bonner, with his battle-worn armor and scarred face, looked at Calyx, his eyes intense yet calm. "You're fighting wrong," Bonner said simply, his voice steady despite the chaos. "This isn't just about shooting and running. This is about trust. You've got to fight together. Protect the man next to you, and he'll do the same for you." Calyx listened, confused but intrigued. "But we have no choice. We must fight to protect ourselves." Bonner shook his head, a knowing smile crossing his lips. "No, you protect your people, and they protect you. That's how we survive. That's how we win." For the first time, Calyx saw the war through Bonner's eyes, not as a series of isolated battles to be fought and won, but as a collective struggle. In that moment, Calyx understood that human bravery was not simply about fighting for oneself. It was about fighting for those who could not fight for themselves. It was about sacrifice. The bond between Calyx and Bonner grew stronger with each passing day. They fought side by side, facing down the Crawl in brutal, close-quarters combat. They covered each other's backs, watched for flanking moves, and made sure to keep moving forward. Calyx learned quickly from Bonner, adapting to the fast-paced, unpredictable tactics that the humans used. He learned to trust his instincts and, more importantly, to trust the people around him. Bonner's teachings, though simple, changed Calyx's approach to war. It wasn't about just defeating the enemy. It was about protecting your comrades, about ensuring that everyone had a chance to fight another day. But just as the Zarinthians began to hope that victory was within their grasp, tragedy struck. A Crawl ambush, expertly executed, caught the humans and Zarinthians by surprise. A group of soldiers, including Calyx and Bonner, were trapped in a narrow ravine, surrounded on all sides. The situation was dire. The Crawl were closing in, and there was no escape. The sounds of Crawl warships overhead grew louder, signaling the imminent assault. It was in this moment of desperation that Sergeant Bonner made the ultimate decision. As the Crawl forces advanced, he knew there was no way all of them would survive. But he also knew that there was a way to ensure that Calyx and the rest of the team had a fighting chance. Without hesitation, Bonner made a plan. He would be the bait. He would draw the Crawl forces away from the group, giving the others the opportunity to escape. He knew it was a suicide mission, but he didn't care. This was what he had been trained for, to protect those who could not protect themselves. "Calyx," Bonner said, his voice low but firm, "you've got to get out of here. Take them to safety. I'll hold them off." Calyx's heart sank. He had grown to trust Bonner like a brother, and the thought of losing him was unbearable. "No, I won't leave you behind." Bonner gave him a look, one of those rare, serious looks that left no room for argument. "You have to. We fight for each other, remember. This is my fight, my sacrifice. You lead them. You get them home." With a heavy heart, Calyx nodded, knowing that this was the only way. Bonner's sacrifice would give them the chance they needed. The humans had fought together, but now, in this final moment, it was up to them to honor Bonner's legacy and continue the fight. Bonner's final act was nothing short of heroic. He lured the Crawl forces into an open area, setting off explosives and using every weapon at his disposal to keep them occupied. His team managed to escape, but Bonner never made it out. As the last of the humans and Zarinthians made their way to safety, Calyx looked back one last time. He held Bonner's dog tags in his hands, the small metal tag cold against his palm. The weight of it felt like a burden, a reminder of the sacrifice that had been made for them. Calyx knew that he would never forget Bonner, that he would carry his memory into every battle, into every fight. Bonner's bravery, his willingness to give everything for others, was something Calyx would never take for granted again. As the Zerinthians and humans regrouped, the loss of Bonner weighed heavily on them all. But they also knew that his sacrifice had given them a chance to win. The Kraul were still out there, still a threat, but they were no longer invincible. The humans had shown them the true meaning of courage, not in the absence of fear, but in fighting for something greater than oneself. For Calyx, the war was no longer just about survival. It was about honor, about protecting those who couldn't protect themselves. And as he looked around at the soldiers who had fought beside him, humans and Zerinthians alike, he knew that together they would finish what they had started. They would defeat the Kraul, not just for themselves, but for the memory of those who had given everything for the cause. The loss was deep, but the fire of Bonner's sacrifice would live on in the hearts of all who had witnessed it. And with that fire burning inside them, they would fight until the last Kraul ship had been driven from the skies. The tension was unbearable as humanity's final push against the Kraul dominion was about to begin. After months of fighting, countless sacrifices, and endless moments of uncertainty, the humans and Zerinthians were ready to face their greatest challenge. The time had come to strike at the heart of the Kraul fleet, their massive flagship, Dominion's Wrath. If they could take down the flagship, they might just have a chance to turn the tide of the war. Humanity had already proven itself as a force to be reckoned with. Their resilience, their unpredictable tactics, and their unwavering determination had already left a lasting mark on the Kraul. Now, with the final plan in motion, it was time for a desperate, high-risk maneuver that could either change everything or result in utter disaster. It was a gamble, but humanity had never been one to shy away from a fight, especially when the fate of two species was on the line. The Zerinthian fleet, now united with humanity's ships, prepared for the ultimate assault. As the human and Zerinthian ships gathered in formation, the gravity of the moment became clear. This wasn't just a battle for survival. This was a battle for the future of their civilizations. If they failed here, everything would be lost. There would be no more hope, no more resistance. The Kraul would have their victory, and they would continue to spread across the galaxy, crushing everything in their path. Despite the odds, the humans showed no fear. Their ships, sleek and powerful, broke through the Kraul lines with terrifying speed. Each ship was armed with state-of-the-art weapons, pulse lasers, ion cannons, and cloaked drones. These weapons were unlike anything the Kraul had seen before, a new level of technological sophistication that caught the enemy completely off guard. The Kraul had underestimated humanity's ability to innovate, but they had learned their lesson too late. As the human ships cut through the Kraul defenses, they unleashed a storm of devastating firepower. Pulse lasers lit up the sky, cutting through enemy ships with pinpoint precision. Ion cannons fired, sending waves of electrical energy that disabled entire Kraul vessels. And cloaked drones, invisible to enemy sensors, slipped through the chaos, attacking from unexpected angles and causing havoc within the Kraul fleet. The battle was intense. The space around them was filled with explosions, flashing lights, and the deafening sounds of weapons fire. Ships were torn apart in moments, their hulls ripped open by the sheer force of the attacks. It was a spectacle of violence and destruction, but for the humans and Zerinthians fighting alongside them, it was more than that. It was a chance to take back what the Kraul had stolen from them: their homes, their families, their future. But the battle was far from won. The Kraul flagship, Dominion's Wrath, remained untouched at the center of the conflict, its massive hull bristling with weapons and shields that seemed impervious to humanity's attacks. This was the heart of the Kraul war machine, the ship that controlled everything. And if they couldn't disable it, all their efforts would be in vain. Humanity's final plan was bold, too bold, perhaps. They would infiltrate the Dominion's Wrath and strike at its core. It was a dangerous mission, one that would require every ounce of skill and bravery the humans could muster. They would have to board the flagship, breach its defenses, and take down its command center. But there was no other option. This was the last chance they had to end the Kraul's reign of terror. As human soldiers prepared to board, they knew they were facing the greatest challenge of their lives. They were outmatched in technology, outnumbered in firepower, and the odds were stacked against them. But they were also driven by something the Crawl could never understand, a resolve that went beyond mere survival. The humans were fighting for something more, something that could not be quantified by technology or firepower. They were fighting for freedom, for justice, and for the lives of everyone they loved. On board the Dominion's Wrath, the situation was just as chaotic. The Crawl had not expected the humans to infiltrate their flagship, and now they were scrambling to contain the threat. But the humans were relentless. They fought their way through the ship's tight corridors, facing down Crawl soldiers, automated defenses, and all manner of obstacles. Each room they entered, each hallway they crossed, was a battle unto itself. But the humans pressed on, using every trick in the book to outsmart their enemies. The Crawl were brutal fighters, but they were also predictable. They relied heavily on their advanced technology and overwhelming numbers, but the humans were unpredictable. They fought with creativity, adapting to the situation as it unfolded. The Crawl commanders were caught off guard time and again as the humans outwitted them, setting traps, feints, and ambushes to confuse their foes. As the humans fought deeper into the ship, they reached the heart of the Dominion's Wrath, the command room, where the fate of the war would be decided. The room was a massive cavernous space, filled with consoles, control panels, and advanced machinery. The Crawl commanders stood at their stations, oblivious to the humans who had infiltrated their ranks. But the humans were closing in fast. In a desperate last-ditch effort to stop the assault, the Crawl unleashed their ultimate weapon, a massive energy cannon, aimed directly at the heart of the Zerinthian fleet. It was a weapon of unimaginable power, capable of destroying entire ships in a single shot. The human team, now inside the command center, had no choice. They would have to disable the cannon before it could fire, or it would obliterate the entire fleet, including the Zerinthians who had fought alongside them. The tension was unbearable as the humans worked frantically to shut down the cannon systems. They fought against time, knowing that every second counted, but they didn't give up. They didn't stop. With a final, coordinated effort, they managed to breach the cannon's core and trigger a chain reaction that caused a massive explosion. The Dominion's Wrath trembled as the explosion tore through its systems, ripping apart its core and setting off a chain of detonations throughout the Crawl fleet. The chaos was unlike anything anyone had ever seen. The Dominion's Wrath began to break apart, its massive hull cracking and splintering as explosions ripped through it from the inside. The Crawl fleet, now without its command center, began to crumble. Their ships turned on each other, disorganized and panicked, as their central command structure collapsed. Humanity had done it. They had taken down the Crawl flagship, and in doing so, they had turned the tide of the war. The Crawl, once so confident in their superiority, were now in disarray. Their fleet was falling apart, their command structure shattered. The humans and Zerinthians had achieved the impossible. Against all odds, they had defeated the Crawl and secured their future. As the remnants of the Crawl fleet fled into the depths of space, the humans and Zerinthians stood victorious. The battle was over, but the war had changed them forever. They had fought side by side, against all odds, and emerged victorious. It was a victory not just for the humans and Zerinthians, but for all who had been oppressed by the Crawl. The final assault had been a turning point in the war, a testament to the strength of humanity and the unbreakable bonds forged in the fires of battle. The Crawl might have been a force to be reckoned with, but humanity had proven that they were a force to be feared, one that would never be defeated. The war was over, but the story of humanity's triumph would live on for generations to come. In the aftermath, as the survivors looked up at the stars, they knew one thing for certain. No matter how dark the future seemed, humanity would always fight, always rise, and always find a way to win. Because, in the end, The true strength of humanity wasn't in their technology, their weapons, or their numbers. It was in their heart, their resolve, and their refusal to give up. And that, in the end, was the greatest victory of all. The war was over. The battle that had raged for months was finally finished, and the dust was beginning to settle. The once powerful Krull fleet had been shattered, their command structure torn apart by the relentless might of humanity and the brave Zarinthian forces who had fought side by side with them. What had once seemed impossible had become a reality. The Krull, who had seen themselves as conquerors of the galaxy, were now in retreat, broken and humbled. In the aftermath, the Zarinthians, who had once feared the Krull's overwhelming strength, were now free. The skies above their homeworld, once filled with the shadow of Krull warships, were clear once again. For the first time in what felt like an eternity, the Zarinthians could breathe easy, knowing that their people had been saved, their future secured. But victory had come at a heavy cost. The Krull were retreating, but their defeat was not without its price. As humanity and the Zarinthians surveyed the battlefield, they realized that many lives had been lost, both among the humans and the Zarinthians. The casualties were many, and the scars of the battle would linger for a long time. But it was the loss of one person in particular that weighed heavily on their hearts: Sergeant Bonner. Sergeant Bonner had been the heart and soul of the human effort, a man who had never hesitated to put his life on the line for his comrades. It was Bonner who had made the ultimate sacrifice, giving his life to save the Zarinthian officer Calyx and the rest of the team from a deadly Krull trap. His bravery, his willingness to sacrifice everything for others, was the embodiment of what made humanity so unique. He had shown the Zarinthians what it truly meant to fight for something greater than oneself, to fight not just for survival, but for those you love, for those who stand beside you. As the Zarinthian forces celebrated their hard-won victory, Calyx stood apart, holding Bonner's dog tags in his hand. His mind was heavy with grief, but also with gratitude. Bonner's sacrifice had been the turning point in the war, the moment when everything had changed. Without him, without that selfless act, they would never have made it out alive. And yet, despite the pain of loss, Calyx also felt a deep sense of pride. He was part of something larger now, a victory that belonged to all of them. The Zarinthian High Council, who had once viewed humanity with skepticism, now looked at them with deep respect and admiration. They had witnessed the courage and strength of the human soldiers, and they knew that without them, the Krull would have triumphed. The High Council approached the humans, offering their deepest gratitude for the role they had played in the war. But the humans, in true underdog fashion, simply responded with a humility that only further endeared them to the Zarinthians. "We were never alone in this fight," they said. It was a statement that captured the spirit of humanity, always willing to fight for others, always ready to stand alongside those in need, no matter how impossible the odds. The Zarinthians had fought bravely, but it was humanity's resolve, their unwavering determination, that had turned the tide of the war. As the two species stood together, victorious but forever changed, there was a quiet understanding between them. The Zarinthians had been saved, but they had also learned something invaluable from the humans. They had learned that true strength wasn't just about power, technology, or numbers. True strength was about courage, heart, and the willingness to fight for what was right, no matter the cost. Calyx stood on the bridge of the Zarinthian flagship, gazing out into the vastness of space. The stars twinkled in the distance, their light a reminder of the endless possibilities that now lay ahead. Humanity had not only saved the Zarinthians, but they had also earned their place in the galaxy as a force to be reckoned with. The Krull had been defeated, but the war had been more than just a battle for survival. It had been a battle for honor, for justice, for the future. As Calyx looked at Bonner's dog tags, he felt a deep sense of loss. The man who had given everything for the Zarinthians, for his comrades, would never see the fruits of their victory. But Calyx knew that Bonner's sacrifice had not been in vain. The Krull were no longer a threat. The Zarinthians were free, and humanity had proven, without a shadow of a doubt, that they were a force that could never be underestimated. The war was over, but the lessons learned would echo through the ages. Humanity's place in the galaxy had been secured, not through their technology or weapons, but through their heart, their courage, and their unwavering commitment to each other. And as Calyx looked out at the stars, he knew that this was just the beginning. A new era had dawned, one where humanity would stand as an ally to the Zerinthians and to any species in need of help. Because in the end, humanity had shown the galaxy that they were not just survivors. They were warriors with the strength to change the course of history. And the Zerinthians, having witnessed that strength, would never forget the sacrifices made by these remarkable beings who had fought, not just for victory, but for a future where all could live in peace. The story of the battle would live on in the hearts and minds of those who had fought in it, but it was the lessons of bravery, sacrifice, and unity that would truly define the legacy of this war. And as the Zerinthians looked to the stars, they knew that they were not alone in the universe. Humanity had shown them that, no matter how dark the times may seem, there would always be those willing to rise, to fight, and to protect those who could not protect themselves. The future was uncertain, but for the first time in a long time, the stars seemed a little brighter, because with humanity by their side, the galaxy had hope once again.